Hi, my name is Steph Dalwin. I am a producer and co-founder of New Normal Comedy in Boston, and I have been doing stand-up comedy about 5 years. I got into stand-up comedy by accident. A friend and I were both going through a breakup at the same time, and she was like a lifelong stand-up comedy fan, and I grew up liking comedy, but I wouldn't say that I was particularly a nerd about stand-up comedy. I didn't have a sort of depth of knowledge of stand-up comics, and she had an encyclopedic knowledge of stand-up comics, so she had always wanted to try stand-up. She said we were both fresh out of breakups, and she was like, I think this would be really good for us. Let's just take this comedy class together, and if we hate it, we never have to do it again. So we ended up doing the class together, and it just wasn't for her. She didn't jive particularly well with stand-up. She had stage fright. But I really fell in love with the writing process, with iterating, and just fine-tuning, and just getting to the perfect joke. And so that was January 2020, and then the pandemic hit, and I had two choices. I could either stop doing stand-up, or I could keep writing and honing my craft. And I just loved the writing part of stand-up so much that I kept going with it.
I don't even know where the end of that
sentence is. I just want my skin to look good.
Okay.
It's the most expensive handbag you'll ever have. It's the most expensive piece of leather. You have to condition it.
Very true.
I don't want to end up looking like a lizard.
That's so about it. Okay.
That was about five and a half years ago in like 2019. I remember at that time it was a lot of dudes, not lineups, a lot of cisgendered heterosexual white dudes telling the same sort of types of jokes. And, occasionally you would see a woman, or you would see a person of color, or a queer person on the lineup, but usually it was a very sort of homogenous, at least the types of environments I was finding myself in, the lineup seemed very homogenous. Over the past 2 or 3 years, we've seen I would call it a dramatic shift in the Boston comedy scene. There's still those kind of homogenous lineups with a bunch of, dudes, a bunch of cisgendered, heterosexual white dudes. But increasingly there's pressure, and I think it's good pressure, to include different perspectives on those lineups. And increasingly there are groups like us, like Men in Comedy, like Mooish Productions, like Fool's Freedom. There are tons of others that I'm not mentioning too, but just there have been increasingly more sort of like production companies and collectives that are popping up to create more inclusive spaces, and I think that's really forcing the hand of the rest of the scene in a beautiful way. And it's not just diversity for the sake of diversity either. I mean, at the end result of having multiple different perspectives is just a better product.
Where's the beat?
Oh,
I want to inject things in my lips. I want to inject other parts of my body into other parts of my body. And I can only do that if I'm rich. Thank you for sharing. I want to marry a rich. I want to do hot girl shit. Like tax fraud.
Started stand-up comedy like everybody does. I started wanting to get famous. I started wanting a Netflix special. The more I pursued that, the more miserable it became, because it just felt like every show I took, I had to take. I was taking opportunities I didn't want to take because I felt like I had to if I wanted to get good enough to have a Netflix special or be on Comedy Central. My goals have since changed drastically. I just want to do this because I like it. I'm actually really keen on keeping it a hobby, at least for now, so that I can continue to enjoy it. I love writing. I love iterating. I love the process of cracking a perfect joke. And what helps that is kind of the second thing that keeps me coming back to stand-up is community. I've learned to very carefully curate. I call it curating my echo chamber. I don't just take advice from anybody. I take advice from a very specific group of people who understand me and are committed to understanding me and what I'm trying to do. Whose advice I trust, who will help me work out my material from my perspective, telling me what they think will make a joke work based on how I would tell it, and not just telling me how to tell a joke based on how they would tell it. In terms of goals of New Normal comedy, what I would like to see New Normal do, and what I think we are doing, is just serve the Boston comedy community in the way that it needs to be served. And that means we might end up in a different place than where we start. We started creating shows because we wanted to be the space that we wish we had to perform in all along. Since then, other production companies have come along and are doing something similar, producing shows, sometimes doing it better than we do and did, and sometimes with better marketing than we do, and I think that's fantastic. And so I think that our ethos has kind of shifted a bit away from producing shows, although we do still produce shows. We can just be more selective now. There's not that burden of producing shows all the time. But our ethos has really shifted away from just a production company to a community building mechanism. And so we're moving towards more community-based stand-up events with a philanthropic component, also stand-up events to build community within our community, help stand-ups hone their material, get more reps, etc.
We know what the orcas are doing? There is one female orca named Gladys, a queen among us, who is sinking yachts. Just nudging them vigorously enough that yachts are sinking. And more to the point, she's teaching other orcas to do it too. Orcas, the labor organizers of the sea.